read through this short story Stray 2 times, first on your own, and the second time was with me. We're going to go through it a third time, and we're going to actually annotate the text. So this is where you will need your blue, green, and pink highlighter, and you'll also use your pencil. Okay, so we're going to create an annotation key, and I just want you to go ahead and put the key right up in the upper right hand corner of your story. So the first thing that we're going to annotate here is the setting. Okay, we're also going to include the protagonist. We are also going to include, of course, the plot. And the last thing that we will be looking for are the complications. Okay, so the first color that we're going to use, of course, is your blue. So we're going to use our blue highlighter, and whenever we come to setting, we are going to highlight it in blue. And then whenever we come to some clues about the protagonist, we will highlight it, or I'm sorry, we won't highlight, but we will underline in black. Okay. And then plot will be green, so grab your green highlighter. We're going to highlight in green for that. And then any complications, which we know that there were a few, we are going to highlight in pink. Okay, so let's get started. And we will go ahead and grab our blue highlighter and we're looking for setting. We're looking for setting. This is anything that gives us a clue into where the story is taking place, maybe the time of year, where they are. Okay, so in January, a puppy wandered onto the property of Mr. Amos Lacey and his wife Mamie and their daughter Doris. Icicles hung 3 feet or more from the eaves of houses, snowdrifts swallowed up automobiles, and the birds were so fluffed up they looked comic. All right, so there is our first piece of information that we're getting about the setting. Okay, so we have icicles hung 3 feet or more from the eaves of houses, snowdrifts swallowed up automobiles, and the birds were so fluffed up they looked comic. So this is telling us that they're in a neighborhood, okay, the eaves of houses, so we can see lots of houses in our mind with icicles that hung 3 feet or more. Those are big icicles, okay? They must have been hanging there for quite some time. Snowdrifts swallowed up automobiles. So that's telling us that there are cars on the road that are almost swallowed up by the snow. That means the snow is so high that they can't get their cars out, and the snow is just almost completely covering the car. Okay? All right, let's keep going. The puppy had been abandoned, and it made its way down the road toward the Lacey's small house. Okay, so now we know that the Lacey's have a small house. Okay, its ears tucked, its tail between its legs, shivering. So this poor little puppy is on the road, abandoned. It's in this cold, cold setting, and it's just shivering out there. Okay, let's keep going. Doris, whose school had been called off because of the snow, was out shoveling the cinder block front steps when she spotted the pup on the road. She set down the shovel. Okay, whose school had been called off because of the snow? That is giving us another clue into the setting. She's not at school. She hasn't been going because she can't get there. There's so much snow that automobiles can't even get out. Okay, so she was out shoveling the cinder block front steps when she spotted the pup. Okay, so now we're going to switch over to our black because we've been introduced to the protagonist here. So go ahead and grab your pencil, and we're going to say that the protagonist is Doris. Even though we do have, Mr. Amos Lacey and his wife, Doris really is the main character, and we know that by reading. We've already read through it. So Doris, okay. I think now we will switch to our green. We're going to look for some plot elements here that starts to move the story along. So let's see. She sat down the shovel. "Hey, come on," she called. The puppy stopped in the road, wagging its tail timidly, trembling with shyness and cold. Doris trudged through the yard, went up the shovel drive, and met the dog. "Come on, Pooch." Okay, so what is our inciting incident that starts this plot moving along? Yes, it is when she spotted the pup on the road. Okay, she spotted him. Oh, there's a dog. Okay, so that starts the plot moving along, excuse me. Okay, she set down the shovel. "Hey, come on," she called. The puppy stopped in the road, wagging its tail timidly, trembling with shyness and cold. Doris trudged through the yard because it's so snowy, remember, went up the shovel drive, and met the dog. "Come on, Pooch." "Where did that come from?" Mrs. Lacey asked as soon as Doris put the dog down in the kitchen. Okay, so not only did she spot the pup and grab the pup, she grabbed him and she took him inside the house and put the dog down in the kitchen. Okay, Mr. Lacey was at the table cleaning his fingernails with his pocket knife. Okay, so now we have this image of her dad with a knife just sitting there cleaning his fingernails. So it kind of sounds like maybe a tough guy, right? Maybe. No nonsense. The snow was keeping him home from his job at the warehouse. "I don't know where it came from," he said mildly, "but I know for sure where it's going." Okay, well that sounds to me like a complication right there. So we are going to highlight that in pink because, as it says in our annotation key, any complications, we are going to highlight those with pink. Oops, I accidentally changed that, didn't I? Okay, so Doris has it in her mind that this dog might possibly get to stay, but the dad is like, I know where it's going. So right there's a complication. Okay, Doris hugged the puppy hard against her. She said nothing. And I'm going to say that this gives us a little bit of insight into Doris. So we're going to grab our black and underline where it says she said nothing. Doris didn't argue with her dad. She didn't say, "But Dad, come on, it's just a puppy." She said nothing because she knew there's no use in even trying. She's not going to get to keep the dog. Okay? Because the roads would be too bad for travel for many days, Mr. Lacey couldn't get out to take the puppy to the pound in the city right away. He agreed to let it sleep in the basement while Mrs. Lacey grudgingly let Doris feed it table scraps. The woman was sensitive about throwing out food. Okay, so we are going to change back to our pink because Mrs. Lacey grudgingly let Doris feed it table scraps. So that means they didn't even really want to feed the dog. Not because they wanted to be rude, to the dog, of course. They didn't want to keep the dog at all. So they grudgingly let Doris feed it table scraps. It sounds to me like they didn't have a whole lot of food to go around for the family in the first place, and now the mom didn't want to throw any food out, of course. So they said, well, just give it to the dog, I guess, So that's a complication too, and that just shows us even further that she did not want to keep the dog. They weren't happily giving it food. When you get a new pup, you're like, oh, let's give him a snack or give him a treat or whatever. Like, no. They did not want to do that. Okay, let's keep going. By the looks of it, Doris figured the puppy was about 6 months old and on its way to being a big dog. She thought it might have some shepherd in it. Okay, so let's go ahead and go on to our next page here. This is page 2. 4 days passed and the puppy did not complain. It never cried in the night or howled at the wind. It didn't tear up everything in the basement. It wouldn't even follow Doris up the basement steps unless it was invited. It was a good dog. Several times Doris had opened the door to the kitchen that led to the basement, and the puppy had been there, all stretched out, on the top step. Doris knew it had wanted some company and that it had lain against the door, listening to the talk in the kitchen, smelling the food, being a part of things. It always wagged its tail, eyes all sleepy, when she found it there. Even after a week had gone by, Doris didn't name the dog. All right, you guys, so let's switch over to our black because this is telling us more about Doris. She didn't even name the dog because she knew better. She knew better than to name the dog, okay? She knew her parents wouldn't let her keep it, that her father made so little money, any pets were out of the question, and that the pup would definitely go back to the pound when the weather cleared. Okay, no question about it. She knew. She was smart enough to know that her dad was a man of his word. So this is still part of the plot. Okay. Now I'm underlining this, but of course you can highlight right over it. Oops, that turned into an arrow. I don't know why. Sorry. All right, so let's keep reading. Still, she tried talking to them about the dog at dinner one night. "She's a good dog, isn't she?" Doris said, hoping one of them would agree with her. Her parents glanced at each other and went on eating. She's not much trouble," Doris added. "I like her." She smiled at them, but they continued to ignore her. "I figure she's real smart," Doris said to her mother. "I could teach her things." Mrs. Lacey just shook her head and stuffed a forkful of sweet potato in her mouth. Doris fell silent, praying the weather would never clear. But on Saturday, 9 days after the dog had arrived, the sun was shining and the roads were plowed. Mr. Lacey opened up the trunk of his car and came into the house. Doris was sitting alone in the living room, hugging a pillow and rocking back and forth on the edge of the chair. She was trying not to cry, but she was not strong enough. Her face was wet and red, her eyes full of distress. Okay, so we are going to switch back to our black because this is giving us more insight into Doris, okay, into the protagonist. She was trying not to cry, but she was not strong enough, okay? Her face was wet and red, her eyes full of distress. Mrs. Lacey looked into the room from the doorway. "Mama," Doris said in a small voice, "please." Okay, let's move on to page number 3 here. Mrs. Lacey shook her head. "You know we can't afford a dog, Doris. You try and act more grown-up about this." Doris pressed her face into the pillow. Outside, she heard the trunk of the car slam shut, one of the doors open and close, the old engine cough and choke and finally start up. "Daddy," she whispered, "please." She heard the car travel down the road, and though it was early afternoon, she could do nothing but go to her bed. She cried herself to sleep, and her dreams were full of searching and searching for things lost. It was nearly night when she finally woke up. Laying there like stone, still exhausted, she wondered if she'd ever have anything in her life have anything. She stared at the wall for a while, but she started feeling hungry, and she knew she'd have to make herself get out of bed and eat some dinner. She wanted not to go into the kitchen, past the basement door. She wanted not to face her parents, but she rose up heavily. Her parents were sitting at the table, dinner over, drinking coffee. They looked at her when she came in, but she kept her head down. No one spoke. Doris made herself a glass of powdered milk and drank it all down. Then she picked up a cold biscuit and started out of the room. "You better feed that mutt before it dies of starvation," Mr. Lacey said. "Ooh, okay, let's grab our green." That is definitely part of the plot, because now it's a turning point. All here, Doris is depressed and sad and wondering if she'll ever have anything in her life, and right here, when she thinks that her life is just terrible, she hears her dad say something that just makes her turn around. Doris turns around. "What?" "I said you better feed your dog. I figure it's looking for you." Doris put her hand to her mouth. "You didn't take her?" she asked. All right, and the last page here. "Oh, I took her all right. Worst place I've ever seen. 10 dogs to a cage. Smell was enough to knock you down, and they give an animal 6 days to live. Then they kill it with some kind of shot." Doris stared at her father. "I wouldn't leave an ant in that place," he said. So I brought the dog back. Ooh. Oh gosh, it's red. No, 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 no. We want green because this is definitely the plot. So I brought the dog back. Mrs. Lacey was smiling at him and shaking her head as if she would never, ever understand him. Mr. Lacey sipped his coffee. Well, he said, are you going to feed it or not? So we know that Mr. Lacey is a no-nonsense kind of guy, right? He cleans his fingernails with a knife. He hardly says a word. He seems like maybe he, would bring a dog to the pound and just turn around and walk out. But now we see a little insight into his character where he walks in and this place is so terrible he wouldn't even leave an ant there. So Mr. Lacey does have a heart. Okay, so that is actually it for our annotation. These are all the pieces that we annotated. We had our plot in green, we had our setting in blue, the complications are all in pink, and the protagonist, Doris, is underlined with black or our pencil. Okay? All right. You guys can go ahead and put your highlighters away. Make sure you have it all highlighted and annotated because you will be turning it in. All right. I will talk to you in the next video.